A waitress recognizes a ring on a millionaire's hand, identical to her dying mother's. What he reveals will unearth 37 years of devastating lies that destroyed two star-crossed lovers and stole a daughter from her father. The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital burned Emma's tired eyes as she stood outside room 308, her forehead pressed against the cold glass window. Inside, her mother lay motionless beneath white sheets that seemed to swallow her shrinking frame whole. Linda Carter had lost 43 pounds in 6 months, her once vibrant features now reduced to hollow cheeks and skin that stretched too thin over fragile bones. But even in her weakened state, even with tubes running from her arms and monitors beeping their mechanical symphony of survival, Linda's left hand rested protectively over her chest, fingers curved around a single piece of jewelry she refused to remove. A gold ring with a rare blue sapphire that caught the harsh hospital light and transformed it into something almost magical. "Miss Carter, your shift starts in 20 minutes, a voice crackled through Emma's thoughts. She turned to see her manager's text glowing on her phone screen, the third reminder in 10 minutes. Emma pressed her palm against the glass one more time, whispering words her mother couldn't hear. "I'm doing everything I can, Mom. I promise." The November rain hammered against the windows of the Grand as Emma pushed through the heavy oak doors exactly 4 minutes before her shift began. Her uniform, a crisp white shirt and black slacks that cost 2 weeks' tips, was slightly damp from the sprint from the bus stop, but she'd learned to keep emergency supplies in her locker for moments like these. "You're cutting it close again, Carter." Michael, the floor manager, checked his watch with theatrical disapproval. He was 26, 3 years younger than Emma, yet he wielded his clipboard like a scepter of authority that never quite masked his insecurity. "Traffic," Emma lied smoothly, though they both knew she took the bus. "Table 12 is yours tonight. VIP reservation. Don't mess it up." Emma's stomach tightened. VIP tables meant demanding clients, complicated orders, and the kind of pressure that left no room for the exhaustion currently seeping through her bones. She'd worked a double shift yesterday, spent the night in the hospital chair that left permanent indentations on her spine, then returned for today's lunch service before this evening reservation. But VIP tables also meant generous tips, and generous tips meant another week of her mother's medication. "I've got it," she said, straightening her shoulders in a way that suggested confidence she didn't feel. The Grand wasn't just a restaurant. It was a temple of excess where the city's elite came to display their wealth like peacocks, spreading jeweled feathers. Crystal chandeliers dripped from vaulted ceilings, casting prismatic light across tables dressed in Italian linens. The silverware alone cost more than Emma made in a month. She'd been working here for 8 years, ever since her mother's first cancer diagnosis had transformed their modest savings into medical debt that grew like a malignant tumor of its own. 8 years of serving people who spent on a single meal what she earned in a week. 8 years of being invisible while standing in plain sight. "Emma, table 12 just arrived," Sarah, another waitress, grabbed her arm with eyes wide with the particular excitement reserved for celebrity sightings. "It's Richard Ashford." The name meant nothing to Emma initially, but Sarah's reaction suggested it should. "The Richard Ashford," Sarah hissed when Emma's face remained blank. "Self-made millionaire? Started with nothing and built a tech empire? He's been on the cover of Forbes 3 times this year." Emma smoothed her apron and approached table 12 with the practiced smile she'd perfected over 8 years of service. The man sitting with his back to the window was younger than she'd expected, 58 at most, with silver threading through dark hair and a face that might have been handsome if it weren't drawn tight with the particular stress of someone who carried too many decisions. But it wasn't Richard Ashford's face that made Emma's breath catch in her throat. It was his hand. His left hand, specifically, resting on the white tablecloth as he reviewed the wine list with the sommelier. And on his ring finger, catching the chandelier light in a way that sent electric recognition shooting through Emma's chest, was a gold ring with a blue sapphire that looked impossibly, undeniably identical to the one her mother wore. The same rare blue stone, the same antique gold setting. The same way it seemed to hold light within its depths like captured sky. Emma's legs went weak. She steadied herself against a nearby chair, her mind racing through impossible explanations, coincidence, mass production, similar styles from the same jeweler. Except she knew, had always known, that her mother's ring was unique. Linda had told her countless times, in those rare moments when she'd speak about the past, that the ring was one of a kind, a custom piece from a time Emma's mother refused to discuss. "Miss, are you all right?" Emma blinked, realizing she'd been staring. Richard Ashford was looking at her now, concern creasing his forehead. His business associates, 3 men in suits that probably cost more than Emma's car, had paused their conversation. "I'm fine," Emma managed, forcing professionalism into her voice. "Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Emma, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you with drinks while you review the menu?" She took their orders on autopilot, her eyes continually drawn to that ring like a compass needle finding north. When she returned with their cocktails, her hands trembled slightly as she set Richard's scotch before him. "Your ring," the words escaped before she could stop them, professional boundaries dissolving in the face of overwhelming curiosity. "I'm sorry. I don't mean to be forward, but my mother has a ring exactly like that." The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Richard Ashford's face drained of all color. The glass he'd been reaching for slipped from his fingers, hitting the table with a sharp crack that made everyone within 3 tables turn to stare. Amber liquid spread across the white tablecloth like spilled secrets. "What did you say?" His voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. Emma stepped back, startled by the intensity of his reaction. His business associates exchanged confused glances, clearly thrown by seeing their composed host suddenly transformed into someone who looked like he'd seen a ghost. I noticed your ring, the blue sapphire. My mother has one that looks identical, and I thought, your mother." Richard stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound that made several diners glance over disapprovingly. "What's your mother's name?" Emma's heart was pounding now. The entire restaurant seemed to have gone silent, or perhaps it was just the blood rushing in her ears. Linda Carter." "Why?" Richard swayed on his feet. One of his associates jumped up to steady him, concern replacing the earlier confusion. "Richard, are you having a medical episode? Should we call—" "No." Richard's hand shot out, gripping the edge of the table with knuckles that went white. His eyes, Emma noticed, had filled with tears that he seemed unable to control. "No, I need a moment. Gentlemen, please excuse me." He looked at Emma with an expression that combined hope and devastation in equal measure. An expression that suggested she'd just delivered news that was simultaneously the best and worst he'd ever received. "Miss Carter," his voice shook, "I need to speak with you, please, after your shift. It's about your mother's ring." "I don't understand." "The ring," Richard interrupted, and now a tear actually escaped down his cheek, shocking his associates into frozen silence. "Your mother's ring. It was made 37 years ago, custom ordered. There were only 2 ever created, a matched pair." He held up his left hand, displaying the sapphire that caught the light. "This is one. Your mother's is the other." They were supposed to be engagement rings. Emma felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "Engagement rings? But that's impossible. My mother never married. She raised me alone. She always said my father—" "Please!" Richard's voice broke completely now. "What's your mother's maiden name? Before Carter?" "Thompson. Linda Thompson." The sound Richard made wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite a gasp. It was something raw and wounded, the sound of a man who'd just had his entire world torn apart and reconstructed in a single moment. "Linda Thompson," he repeated, as if testing the weight of a name he hadn't spoken in decades. "She's alive. After all these years, she's alive." His business associates had given up all pretense of understanding, standing awkwardly as their composed millionaire host stood in the middle of the grand, with tears streaming down his face, staring at a waitress who'd just inadvertently detonated a bomb in the middle of his carefully controlled life. "I don't understand what's happening," Emma said, her own voice beginning to shake. "How do you know my mother? Why do you have that ring? My mother never mentioned—" "Because she thinks I abandoned her," Richard said, and the pain in his voice was so raw that Emma felt it in her own chest. "Because she thinks I married someone else. Because 37 years ago my father made sure she believed lies that destroyed both our lives." Emma's mind reeled. 37 years ago. That would be right around the time her mother got pregnant. Right around the time Emma would have been conceived. "Mr. Ashford," she whispered, "exactly how well did you know my mother?" Richard met her eyes, and in that moment, Emma saw the answer before he spoke it. "She was the love of my life," he said simply. "We were engaged. These rings," he held up his hand, "I had them custom-made for our wedding. But then I had to leave suddenly for Europe. My father said it was urgent business training. 5 years, he said. When I came back, she was gone. Disappeared. I've spent 37 years trying to find her." The restaurant had gone completely silent now. Even the kitchen noises seemed muted, as if the entire universe was holding its breath for what came next. "Your mother," Richard continued, his voice steadying with visible effort. "When did she have you?" Emma did the math automatically, the numbers clicking into place like a lock opening to reveal something she'd never been meant to see. 32 years ago, she said quietly. "I'm 32 years old." Richard closed his eyes and Emma watched as understanding and grief and rage and love all played across his features in rapid succession. "I have a daughter," he whispered. "She never told me. She disappeared while she was pregnant, and I never knew. My God, I have a daughter." Emma couldn't breathe. The restaurant spun around her. 32 years of questions about her father, about why her mother lived in poverty, about the ring Linda never removed even in her darkest days, suddenly had answers she'd never imagined. "Where is she?" Richard stepped toward Emma urgently. "Where is Linda? I need to see her. Please. You have to take me to her." Emma's throat constricted. Of all the moments for this revelation to come, of all the times for her father, a concept that still felt impossible, to materialize from nowhere. "She's in the hospital," Emma heard herself say. "St. Mary's Hospital, room 308. She's dying, Mr. Ashford. She has stage 4 cancer. The doctors say she has maybe 3 months left." Richard Ashford, self-made millionaire, man who'd built an empire from nothing, stood in the middle of the Grand restaurant and wept. The manager's office at the Grand smelled of leather and expensive cologne, a stark contrast to the antiseptic scent Emma had grown accustomed to at St. Mary's Hospital. Michael had reluctantly agreed to let her take her break early after witnessing the scene at table 12, though his disapproval hung in the air like cigarette smoke. 15 minutes, Carter. That's all I can give you." Emma barely heard him. She sat across from Richard Ashford in the small office, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. Richard had composed himself somewhat, though his eyes remained red-rimmed and his hands trembled as he reached into his jacket pocket. "I need to show you something," he said, his voice still unsteady. "Something I've carried with me every single day for 37 years." He pulled out a worn leather wallet, the kind that spoke of quality despite its age. From one of the inner compartments, he extracted a photograph so faded and creased from handling that Emma had to lean forward to make out the details. The girl in the photo couldn't have been more than 21. She stood in a park somewhere, sunlight catching golden brown hair that fell past her shoulders. Her smile was radiant, unguarded, the kind of smile that suggested she had no idea life could be cruel. She wore a simple sundress, and even in the faded photo, Emma could see the happiness radiating from her like light. "That's your mother," Richard said softly. "Taken the day I proposed. She was 21. I was 21. We thought we had forever." Emma stared at the photograph, her throat tightening. She'd seen pictures of her mother young, of course, but never one where Linda looked so completely, utterly happy. The woman in this photo bore little resemblance to the exhausted, frightened single mother Emma remembered from childhood, or the fragile patient currently withering away in room 308. "What happened?" Emma's voice came out as a whisper. Richard set the photo on the desk between them, his finger tracing the edge as if the gesture could somehow transport him back to that sunlit day. "My father happened," he said, and the bitterness in his voice was like acid. "James Ashford. He built his fortune the old-fashioned way, through strategic marriages, careful alliances, and an absolute conviction that love was for fools and poor people." He looked up at Emma, and she saw decades of pain etched in the lines around his eyes. "When I told him I was going to marry Linda Thompson, a girl who worked as a secretary in a law office, a girl whose father was a mechanic and whose mother cleaned houses, he looked at me like I'd announced I was joining a cult." Emma felt a flash of anger on behalf of the grandmother she'd never known. Her mother had rarely spoken about Emma's grandparents, saying only that they'd passed away when Emma was a baby. He said no, of course, Richard continued. Told me I was throwing away my future, my legacy, everything he'd built. But I didn't care. I'd already commissioned these rings. He held up his left hand again, and the sapphire caught the office's fluorescent light, transforming it into something warmer. Burmese sapphires, one of the rarest varieties in the world. The jeweler told me he'd only seen stones like these twice in his 40-year career. I had him create 2 rings, identical in every way, matching engagement rings, because I wanted Linda to know that we were equals, that I was as committed to her as she was to me. Emma found herself touching the base of her ring finger unconsciously, imagining what it must have felt like for her mother to receive such a gift, to believe in that kind of love. I proposed in that park. Richard gestured to the photo. She said yes. We were going to get married the following spring. Simple ceremony. Just us and people who actually loved us. We didn't need my father's approval or his money. We were going to build something real, something that mattered. But, Emma prompted when he fell silent, but my father was more cunning than I gave him credit for. Richard's jaw tightened. 3 weeks after our engagement, he came to me with what he called a business emergency. One of his European acquisitions was failing, needed immediate attention, required someone with my specific expertise to go oversee the restructuring. He made it sound urgent, critical, time-sensitive. And you went. I had 24 hours' notice, Richard said, and the regret in his voice was palpable. 24 hours, and Linda was out of town visiting her grandmother, who'd had a stroke. I tried calling, left messages, but this was before cell phones were ubiquitous. I left her a letter, told her I'd be back before she knew it, that it was just temporary. Emma's heart was pounding. She knew how this story ended, with her mother alone, pregnant, believing herself abandoned. But hearing the other side felt like watching a tragedy unfold in slow motion. He said it would be 3 months. Richard's hands clenched into fists. 3 months became 6 months. 6 months became a year. Every time I tried to come home, there was another crisis, another problem that only I could solve. My father controlled the money, controlled the business, controlled everything. And I was 21, naive, believing that he was testing me, preparing me to eventually run the company. 5 years, Emma said quietly, remembering what he'd mentioned earlier. 5 years. Richard's voice broke slightly. 5 years in London, Paris, Frankfurt, jumping from one crisis to another. And every single day I wrote to Linda. Letters, postcards, anything I could send to let her know I was thinking of her, that I was coming back, that nothing had changed. Emma felt ice spreading through her chest. She never got them, did she? I didn't know that until much later. Richard pulled out his phone, scrolling through something before turning the screen toward Emma. 2 years ago, my father died. When we were cleaning out his estate, I found this. The image on the screen showed a storage box, and inside it, hundreds, maybe thousands, of envelopes. Emma could make out her mother's name on several of them. Every letter I sent, Richard said hollowly. He intercepted them all, had someone at the post office on his payroll. Linda never received a single word from me. Emma felt tears burning her eyes. But why? Why would he do something so cruel? Because he'd already set his plan in motion, Richard said. While I was in Europe, following his manufactured emergencies like a puppet on strings, he went to Linda personally. The temperature in the office seemed to drop. He told her I'd gotten married, Richard continued, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. Showed her fabricated wedding announcements, forged photographs, fake newspaper articles about my marriage to Catherine Wellington, the daughter of one of his business partners. Told Linda I was on my honeymoon in the French Riviera. Oh my God, Emma breathed. She was pregnant. Richard's voice cracked completely. She must have just found out she was pregnant with you when my father showed up with his lies. Can you imagine? Finding out you're carrying a child? Believing the father just married someone else and abandoned you? Emma could imagine it. She'd spent 32 years watching her mother struggle alone, watching her work multiple jobs, watching her sacrifice everything. And now she understood why Linda had always looked so haunted, why she'd never dated, never remarried, never even seemed interested in companionship. When I finally came back, Richard said, when I finally finished the 5 years of hell my father had orchestrated, the first thing I did was go to Linda's apartment. But she was gone. Moved out months before, no forwarding address. Her employer said she'd quit suddenly. Her landlord knew nothing. It was like she'd vanished. He pulled out another item from his wallet. This one a business card so worn it was barely legible. I hired private investigators, the first of many, spent a fortune trying to find her. But she'd changed her name, left the state, covered her tracks completely, and I didn't know why. Didn't understand what had driven her away until years later, when I finally confronted my father and he admitted what he'd done. He admitted it? Emma's voice rose with anger. On his deathbed, Richard said bitterly. Told me he'd saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. Said Linda was handled appropriately. Those were his exact words. Handled appropriately, like she was a business problem instead of the woman I loved. Emma wiped away tears that had started falling without her permission. Did he know about me? Did he know my mother was pregnant? I don't think so, Richard said. Or maybe he did and didn't care. By the time he told me the truth, 10 years had already passed. I confronted every investigator I'd hired, started the search again with her real name, Linda Thompson. But the trail was cold, and I never thought— His voice broke again. I never thought to look for a child. Never imagined she might have been pregnant when she disappeared. He looked at Emma with such raw pain that she had to look away. I spent 37 years searching for the woman I loved, never knowing she'd given me the greatest gift I could have asked for, never knowing I had a daughter, never knowing I'd lost both of you because of one man's arrogance. The office fell silent except for the muted sounds of the restaurant beyond the door. Emma tried to process everything, tried to reconcile the story she'd just heard with the fragments her mother had shared over the years. Linda had always been so vague about Emma's father, saying only that he'd gone away and that it was complicated. Mr. Ashford? Richard, he interrupted gently. Please. Richard, Emma corrected, the name feeling strange on her tongue. My mother. She's told me almost nothing about my father, just that he left before I was born, that he had his reasons, that some things were better left in the past. She thought I'd abandoned her, Richard said. Thought I'd chosen wealth and status over her and our child. Of course she wouldn't want to talk about that. The betrayal she must have felt. He covered his face with his hands. God, Linda, what did we do to you? Emma reached across the desk instinctively, placing her hand over his. You didn't do anything. Your father did this. But I let it happen. Richard looked up, his eyes fierce with self-recrimination. I was so focused on proving myself, on becoming worthy of taking over the business, that I didn't question why everything kept going wrong. I should have come home anyway. Should have told my father to handle his own emergencies. Should have fought harder. You were 21, Emma said quietly, and you were being manipulated by someone who had all the power. That doesn't change what Linda suffered, Richard said. Doesn't change that you grew up without a father. Doesn't change 37 years of searching and never finding her until— He stopped, his expression transforming from grief to desperate urgency. Emma, please. I know I have no right to ask, but please take me to her. Let me see her. Let me explain what happened. She deserves to know the truth before it's too late. Emma thought about her mother in room 308, about how Linda's face sometimes looked when she thought Emma wasn't watching, an expression of such profound loneliness that it made Emma's chest ache. She thought about the ring her mother never removed, the way Linda would sometimes twist it absently, as if remembering something beautiful and painful all at once. She doesn't know I'm your daughter, Emma said slowly. She never told me who my father was. If I show up with you, then we tell her the truth together, Richard said firmly. All of it. No more lies. No more secrets. She deserves that much. Emma looked at this man who was suddenly, impossibly her father. Looked at the pain in his eyes that mirrored something she'd seen in her mother's gaze her entire life. Two people who'd loved each other, destroyed by lies and manipulation, separated for decades. And now, with her mother dying, they had one chance to make things right. My shift ends in 2 hours, Emma heard herself say. Meet me at the main entrance then. I'll take you to her. Richard stood abruptly, moving around the desk to pull Emma into an embrace she hadn't expected. He held her carefully, as if afraid she might break, and she felt his shoulders shake with silent sobs. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for giving me this chance. Emma pulled back, looking up at him with tears on her own cheeks. She still wears her ring, she said softly. Every single day, even now. She's never taken it off. Richard's hand went to his own ring, the matching sapphire that had waited 37 years to be reunited with its pair. Neither have I, he said. I couldn't. It was the only piece of her I had left. The drive to St. Mary's Hospital took 23 minutes. Emma sat in Richard's Mercedes while he gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. Neither had spoken since leaving the Grand. In 2 hours, Emma's entire life had been dismantled. The father she'd never known suddenly had a face and story both heartbreaking and infuriating. The mother she'd believed she understood had been hiding unimaginable pain. Does she know we're coming? Richard broke the silence. No. I thought it better not to give her time to build walls. What if she tells me to leave? Then we leave. But she deserves the truth. They pulled into the hospital parking lot. Richard looked older suddenly, 37 years of loss visible in his eyes. Emma led him through corridors, past the nurse's station, toward the elevator, to room 308, to Linda. She's very weak, Emma said as they stepped into the elevator. The cancer spread to her lungs and liver. She's on oxygen most of the time now. But she's coherent? Richard's voice shook. She'll understand what we're telling her? Most of the time, yes. She has good hours and bad. Emma pressed the button for the 3rd floor. Evenings are usually better. The elevator doors opened. Emma felt Richard tense beside her. 37 years of searching about to culminate in this moment. They stopped outside room 308. Through the small window, Emma could see her mother propped up in bed, face turned toward the television though probably not watching. Linda spent most time staring at nothing, lost in thoughts she never shared. That's her, Emma whispered, hearing Richard's sharp intake of breath. She looks so small, he said, voice breaking. So fragile. Are you ready? Emma asked. Richard's hand went to his chest. I don't know if I'll ever be ready, but we can't wait any longer. Emma pushed open the door. Linda's head turned at the sound, a small smile forming when she saw her daughter. Emma, sweetheart, I didn't expect you back until tomorrow morning. Did something happen at... She stopped mid-sentence, eyes moving past Emma to the man standing in the doorway. The color drained from Linda's face completely. Her hand flew to her chest, breathing suddenly rapid and shallow, eyes locked on Richard with absolute shock. No, Linda whispered, barely audible over the beeping monitors. No, this isn't... You can't be... Linda. Richard took a step into the room. Linda, it's me. Get out! The scream that tore from Linda's throat was so unexpected, so full of raw anguish that Emma jumped. Get out of here. I don't want to see you. I don't. Linda's words dissolved into a coughing fit that racked her frail body. Emma rushed to her side, reaching for the oxygen mask, but Linda pushed her away with surprising strength. Why would you bring him here? Linda's eyes, when they met Emma's, were filled with betrayal. Why would you do this to me? Mom, please, just listen. I don't want to listen. Linda's voice cracked, tears streaming down hollow cheeks. I don't want to hear excuses or explanations or whatever lies he's come to tell after 37 years. Richard stood frozen near the door. Linda, please, I know you're angry. I know you have every right to hate me, but you need to know the truth about what happened, about why I left. I know why you left. Linda's laugh was bitter, broken. You left because I wasn't good enough, because your father found you someone better, someone worthy of the Ashford name. That's not true. Don't you dare lie to me. Linda tried to sit up further, movements hindered by IV lines and oxygen tubes. I saw the wedding announcement. I saw the pictures. Your father showed me everything. You and Catherine Wellington, married in some beautiful ceremony I was never going to be invited to. Emma felt like she was watching a dam break. 37 years of pain flooding out of her mother in waves. Your father came to my apartment, Linda continued, voice shaking. 3 months after you left. 3 months of me waiting, wondering why you hadn't written, why you hadn't called. And then he showed up with his expensive suit and his cold eyes and his folder full of lies. They were lies, Richard said desperately, taking another step closer. Linda, everything he showed you was fabricated. I never married Catherine. I never married anyone. Linda stared at him, expressions cycling between hope and disbelief and anger. Don't do this. Don't give me false hope after all these years. I saw the wedding photo, Richard. You in your tuxedo, her in her dress, both of you looking so happy. Photoshopped. Richard pulled out his phone with shaking hands. Before that technology was common, my father paid professionals to create fake photographs. I have the originals he had made. Found them in his office after he died. Linda, look. He held out the phone. Emma saw professional quality photographs of Richard in a tuxedo, standing next to a beautiful woman in a wedding dress, both smiling at the camera. But when Richard zoomed in, Emma could see the subtle inconsistencies, the lighting that didn't match, the slight blur around edges where two separate images had been merged. I never stood next to Catherine Wellington, Richard said, voice raw. We never dated, never kissed, never married. These photos are composites. My father had photographers take individual shots of both of us at different events, then paid experts to merge them into wedding pictures. Linda's breathing had become more labored. She looked at the phone, then at Richard, mind clearly struggling to reconcile 37 years of believing one truth with the possibility of another. The newspaper announcements, she whispered. The article in the society pages about your honeymoon. All fabricated, Richard said. My father owned stakes in several newspapers. He paid to have fake announcements printed in specific editions he knew you'd see. The honeymoon articles were ghost-written and inserted into single copies. But why? Linda's voice broke completely. Why would he go to such lengths? Because he knew that money wouldn't work, Richard said, and Emma heard decades of bitterness in his voice. He knew you loved me genuinely, that money wouldn't make you walk away, so he made you believe I'd betrayed you, made you hate me enough to disappear completely. Emma watched her mother process this, saw the exact moment when the implications hit her. Linda's hand flew to her mouth, eyes going wide with horror. Oh God, Linda breathed. Oh my God, you came back for me. I came back for you, Richard confirmed, tears streaming down his face. 5 years later, I came back ready to fight my father for you, to give up everything. But you were gone. Your apartment was empty, no forwarding address. It was like you'd vanished. I changed my name, Linda said hollowly. Went back to using my grandmother's maiden name, Carter. Moved 3 states away. She stopped, eyes moving to Emma. I was pregnant. I found out 2 months after you left. And when your father came with those photos, told me you were married, I knew I had to disappear completely. The room fell into absolute silence. Richard's eyes moved from Linda to Emma, then back to Linda, his face transforming with realization. Pregnant, he repeated, voice barely a whisper. You were pregnant when you disappeared. With your daughter, Linda said, fresh tears falling. With Emma. Richard's legs seemed to give out. He grabbed the back of the visitor's chair, entire body shaking. I have a daughter. We have a daughter. And I never knew. Linda, I searched for you for 37 years, and I never knew I had a child. I thought you'd abandoned us, Linda said, voice so broken it barely sounded human. Thought you'd chosen wealth and status over us. I spent 32 years raising our daughter alone, telling her that her father was gone because I couldn't bear to tell her the truth, that I thought you just didn't want us. Emma felt tears streaming down her own face as she watched her parents together for the first time in her memory, break apart with the weight of what had been stolen from them. I wanted you, Richard said fiercely, crossing the room to kneel beside Linda's bed. God, Linda, I wanted you more than anything in this world. I wrote you letters every single day. Hundreds of them. Thousands. My father intercepted them all. You never received a single word from me. Linda reached out with a trembling hand, touching Richard's face, as if confirming he was real. I wore your ring, she whispered. Every single day for 37 years, I wore this ring because it was the only piece of you I had left. Richard caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek, then held up his own left hand, where the matching sapphire caught the harsh hospital light. I never took mine off either, he said. Never could. It was the only connection I had to you. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. 2 rings that were meant to be together, finally reunited, held by hands that had aged and weathered, but never forgotten. Then Linda's face crumpled completely, and she began to sob with such raw anguish that it seemed to shake the very air in the room. We lost everything, she cried. 37 years, Richard. Our wedding, our life together, watching our daughter grow up. We lost all of it because of one man's cruelty. Richard climbed carefully onto the edge of the hospital bed, gathering Linda's fragile form into his arms as gently as if she were made of glass. "I know," he murmured into her hair. "I know, my love. I know." Emma stood back, watching her parents embrace for what might have been the first time in nearly 4 decades, and felt something break open in her own chest. All her life, she'd wondered what it would be like to have a father. She'd imagined reunions, daydreamed about explanations that would make sense of her single-parent household. She'd never imagined this. Never imagined that the absence had been orchestrated, that her father had been searching for her all along, that a love story had been destroyed by lies and manipulation. "I'm so sorry," Richard kept repeating, rocking Linda gently. "I'm so sorry I didn't fight harder. I'm so sorry I believed my father. I'm so sorry I left you alone." "You didn't know," Linda said between sobs. "You didn't know what he was doing." Neither of us knew. But Emma suffered for it. Richard looked up, meeting Emma's eyes across the room. "Our daughter grew up without a father because I was too trusting to see what my own father was capable of." Emma found her voice, though it came out rough with emotion. "You were 21, she said, "and you were manipulated by someone who was supposed to love you. Neither of you is to blame for what James Ashford did." Linda reached out a hand toward Emma, who crossed the room to take it. Her mother's grip was weak, her fingers cold, but the love in her eyes was fierce. "I'm sorry I never told you the truth," Linda said. "I thought protecting you from the pain of rejection was better than telling you about a father who'd chosen to leave. I never imagined." Her voice broke. "I never imagined he'd been looking for us all this time." Emma squeezed her mother's hand gently. "We're all here now," she said. "That's what matters." But even as she said it, Emma was aware of the IV bags, the monitors, the oxygen mask hanging within easy reach. They were all together now, yes. But for how long? The hospital room had fallen into a silence, broken only by Linda's labored breathing and the steady beep of monitors. Emma watched her parents. The words still felt strange, surreal, holding each other as if afraid that letting go would make the other disappear again. "I need to show you something," Richard said finally, voice hoarse from crying. He gently disentangled himself from Linda and reached for the leather messenger bag he'd brought. "Something I've been carrying with me for decades." Emma moved closer as Richard pulled out a worn accordion folder, its edges frayed from years of handling. When he opened it, photographs spilled onto the hospital bed, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. "What is all this?" Linda asked, picking up one photo with trembling fingers. "Proof," Richard said simply. "Proof that I never stopped looking for you." Emma leaned over to see. The photograph Linda held showed a younger Richard, standing in front of a dingy apartment building, holding what looked like a missing person flyer. His face was gaunt, eyes hollow with exhaustion and desperation. "That was taken 6 months after I came back from Europe," Richard explained. "I'd hired my 3rd private investigator by then. The first 2 gave up after a few months, said you'd covered your tracks too well. But I couldn't give up." He pulled out more photographs. Richard in different cities, different years, always the same haunted expression. Richard posting flyers on telephone poles. Richard talking to people on street corners, showing them Linda's photograph. 37 years, Richard's voice cracked. "I spent 37 years and most of my fortune trying to find you. I hired investigators in 12 states, placed advertisements in over 50 newspapers, created websites before most people knew what the internet was." Linda's hands shook as she looked through the photographs, tears streaming down her face. "I had no idea. I thought you'd just moved on, built your perfect life with your perfect wife." "There was no perfect life," Richard said fiercely. "There was no life at all without you. Do you know how many women my family tried to set me up with after I came back? How many suitable matches they paraded in front of me? How many?" Emma heard herself ask. "I stopped counting after the 20th. Richard pulled out another folder, this one containing newspaper clippings. "They all gave up eventually, when they realized I was serious about never marrying anyone but Linda Thompson." Emma picked up one clipping from a society magazine dated 15 years ago. The headline read, "Most eligible bachelor, finally off the market." Below was a photograph of Richard at some gala. The article speculated about his perpetual single status despite his wealth. "The press loved me," Richard said bitterly. The mysterious billionaire who never dated. They called me everything from a confirmed bachelor to a secret romantic. They had no idea I was just searching for the woman I loved. Linda picked up another document, a contract with a private investigation firm dated 10 years ago. Emma's breath caught when she saw the amount. $250,000. You spent $250,000 on one investigation? Emma whispered. That was the cheapest one, Richard said. The year my father died, I liquidated part of his estate and put $5 million into finding you. I hired 15 different agencies simultaneously. Nothing. You'd vanished so completely it was like you'd never existed. I changed everything, Linda said. My name, my social security number through the courts, claiming domestic violence. Moved to a state where I'd never been. I buried Linda Thompson so deep that even I sometimes forgot she existed. Emma felt anger rising in her chest. You were that scared? That convinced he'd abandoned you? You don't understand. Linda turned to her daughter, eyes pleading. Your grandfather, James Ashford, he didn't just show me fake wedding photos. He told me that Richard had laughed when he told him I was probably pregnant. Said Richard called me a mistake, he was glad to escape. What? Richard's face went white. He told you I said that? He was very convincing, Linda said. He sat in my tiny apartment, in his $1,000 suit, drinking tea from my chipped mug, and told me in explicit detail how relieved Richard was to be free of me. How Richard had said that marrying Catherine was marrying up in every way. Richard stood abruptly, pacing to the window. His shoulders shook with rage. My father told me you'd gotten engaged to someone else. A lawyer, he said. Told me you'd said I was too immature, too dependent on family money, that you wanted someone who'd already made something of himself. I never said that, Linda whispered. I never would have. I know that now. Richard turned back, face streaked with tears. But I was 26 years old, just back from 5 years in Europe, where my father had essentially imprisoned me with one manufactured crisis after another. And when I finally came home ready to fight for you, you were gone. And my father was there, consoling me, telling me you'd moved on with someone better. Emma felt like she was drowning in the enormity of the deception. How could he do that? How could anyone be so cruel to their own child? Control, Richard said simply. My father built his empire on control. He controlled his business partners through leverage. He controlled politicians through donations. He controlled his family through fear and manipulation. The idea that his son would marry beneath their station, that the Ashford name would be diluted by someone from what he called common stock. It was unacceptable to him. I was nothing to him, Linda said, voice hollow. Less than nothing. A problem to be eliminated. You were everything to me. Richard crossed back to the bed, taking Linda's hands. You still are. You're the reason I never married. The reason I never had children with anyone else. The reason I kept these rings, these photographs, these investigation reports. I couldn't let go because somewhere deep inside, I knew we weren't finished. Emma picked up another document, a letter addressed to Richard, returned to sender, dated 20 years ago. The return address was from a Linda Carter in Ohio. Wait, Emma's voice shook as she held up the letter. Mom, did you try to contact him? Linda's face crumpled. Once. Just once. Emma, you were 12 years old, and you just asked me for the 100th time why you didn't have a father like the other kids. And I was so tired of lying, so tired of being alone, so tired of carrying the weight of everything by myself. What happened? Richard asked quietly. I wrote you a letter, Linda said. Told you about Emma. Told you that I knew you were married and happy, but that our daughter deserved to know her father existed. I sent it to your company's headquarters, and then I waited. For months, I waited for some response. A phone call, a letter, anything. But nothing came. Richard's hands were shaking. I never received it. I swear to God, Linda, I never received any letter from you. I know that now, Linda said. But then, I thought you'd gotten it, and decided we still weren't worth your time. That was the moment I gave up completely. That was when I accepted that you were never coming back. Emma felt tears streaming down her face. You tried to reach out to him when I was 12. That was the year you got so sick, wasn't it? The year you couldn't get out of bed for 3 months. Depression, Linda admitted. I'd been fighting it for years, but that was when it finally won. When I realized that even facing complete humiliation and rejection, I couldn't reach you. That's when I understood we were truly alone. Richard had gone completely still. What date did you send that letter? Linda thought for a moment. March 15th. I remember because it was Emma's birthday. I thought maybe it was a sign, sending it on the day we created her. Richard pulled out his phone, scrolling through something. His face went gray. March 15th, 20 years ago. That was the day my father had his first major stroke. He was in the hospital for 6 weeks. I wasn't at the office at all during that time. I was managing everything from the hospital. He recovered, but he was never quite the same after that. You think he intercepted the letter? Emma asked. I don't think, Richard said grimly. I know. He had his secretary forward all important mail to the hospital. Anything addressed to me personally went through him first. He probably opened it, read it, and destroyed it just like he destroyed everything else we tried to build. Linda was crying so hard now that her breathing became labored. The monitor's beeping accelerated, and Emma reached for the oxygen mask. Mom, you need to calm down. This is too much stress. 37 years, Linda gasped through the mask. 37 years we lost because of one man's cruelty. Emma, you grew up without a father. Richard, you never got to meet your daughter. We never had our wedding, our life, our family. All of it stolen. I'm so angry, Emma surprised herself by saying. I'm so angry at him. At James Ashford, a man I never met who died 10 years ago, and I hate him more than I've ever hated anyone. He died thinking he'd won, Richard said bitterly. Died thinking he'd successfully separated us, that his bloodline remained pure, that he'd protected the Ashford legacy. He never knew that I spent my entire adult life trying to undo what he'd done. But you never found her, Emma said, and immediately regretted the harshness in her voice. I'm sorry, you had all this money, all these resources, and you still couldn't find us. I know, Richard's voice broke. I know, and it's the greatest failure of my life. I built a billion-dollar company. I revolutionized entire industries. I have patents and properties and investments all over the world. But I couldn't find the two most important people in my life. What good is any of it if I lost you both? Linda removed the oxygen mask with shaking hands. Richard, look at me. You didn't fail. He cheated. He lied. He manipulated. He intercepted our letters, forged documents, paid people to lie to both of us. You didn't fail. You were fighting an enemy you didn't know existed until it was too late. But Emma suffered. Richard looked at his daughter. You grew up without a father because I wasn't smart enough, wasn't paranoid enough, wasn't strong enough to see through his deceptions. Emma felt something shift inside her. No, she said firmly. I grew up without a father because James Ashford was a cruel, controlling man who cared more about his legacy than about his son's happiness. That's not your fault. It's not Mom's fault. It's his fault, and his alone. The room fell silent again. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the hospital floor. Somewhere down the hall, a baby cried. Life continued, indifferent to the decades of pain being processed in room 308. We can't get those years back, Linda said finally. We can't change what happened, but we have now, however long now lasts. Her words hung in the air, heavy with the unspoken truth they all knew. Linda's now was measured in weeks, maybe months. 37 years of separation couldn't be undone, but they could make the time that remained count. Richard climbed back onto the bed, and Emma sat in the chair beside them. 3 people bound by blood and love and loss, finally together, finally understanding the truth, finally, impossibly, a family. 3 days after the reunion, Richard arrived at room 308, carrying a small velvet box that looked as worn as the photographs he'd shown Linda. Emma watched from her usual chair as he approached her mother's bed with the nervous energy of a young man about to do something that would change his life forever. Linda, Richard said, his voice shaking slightly. I know we've already had this conversation once. 37 years ago, in a park on a sunny afternoon, I asked you to marry me, and you said yes. Linda's eyes, which had been closed when he entered, opened slowly. Despite her weakness, despite the oxygen mask and the IV lines and the monitors tracking her fading life, something sparked in those eyes when she looked at Richard. We never got that wedding, Richard continued, lowering himself carefully onto the edge of her bed. We never got to say those vows in front of people who loved us. We never got to promise each other forever, even though we both kept that promise anyway. Emma felt tears beginning to form as she watched Richard open the velvet box. Inside was a wedding band, simple, elegant, designed to fit perfectly with the engagement ring Linda had worn for 37 years. "I had this made a week after I proposed to you," Richard said. "I've been carrying it with me ever since. Everywhere I went, every city I searched, every investigator I hired, this ring was in my pocket, because I always knew, that someday I'd find you again." "Richard?" Linda's voice came out as barely a whisper through the oxygen mask. "Linda Thompson, who became Linda Carter to protect our daughter." Richard's voice broke completely now, tears streaming down his face. "Will you marry me? Right here? Right now? In this hospital room? Will you finally become my wife? Even if it's only for a little while?" The room fell silent, except for the steady beep of the monitors. Emma held her breath, watching her mother's face cycle through a dozen emotions. Grief for the lost years, joy at finally hearing those words again, fear of what marriage now would mean. "Yes," Linda finally whispered, removing the oxygen mask with trembling hands so Richard could hear her clearly. "Yes, I'll marry you. I should have been your wife 37 years ago. Better late than never." Richard slipped the wedding band onto Linda's finger, where it settled perfectly against the engagement ring she'd never removed. The two rings together, finally united, caught the harsh hospital light and transformed it into something beautiful. Emma wiped tears from her eyes. "When?" she asked. "When do you want to do this?" "Tomorrow," Linda said with more strength than Emma had heard in weeks. "I don't want to wait another day. I've waited 37 years. That's long enough." The wedding took place at 2 p.m. the following afternoon in room 308. The hospital chaplain, a kind woman named Margaret who'd seen her share of last-minute unions, stood at the foot of Linda's bed. Emma had spent the morning transforming the sterile hospital room into something resembling a chapel. White roses, Linda's favorite, filled every available surface. Emma had brought her mother's best nightgown from home, a soft blue one that matched the sapphires in their rings. Someone from the hospital had found a white shawl to drape over Linda's shoulders. Richard wore a suit, but had removed the tie at Linda's request. "I want to see you comfortable," she'd said. "We've been uncomfortable enough for 37 years. The witnesses were few. Emma, 2 nurses who'd been caring for Linda, and Jennifer from the nurses' station who'd been following the love story unfolding in room 308. "Dearly beloved," Chaplain Margaret began, and Emma felt her throat tighten. "We are gathered here today to witness the marriage of Richard James Ashford and Linda Marie Thompson." "Linda Marie Carter," Linda corrected gently. "That's who I've been for 37 years. I want to honor that name, even as I take his." The chaplain smiled and adjusted her notes. "Linda Marie Carter. These 2 people have loved each other across decades of separation, through lies and loss, through pain that would have destroyed lesser souls. Today, finally, they make their love official before God and these witnesses." Richard and Linda had written their own vows. Richard went first, pulling a piece of paper from his pocket that looked like it had been written and rewritten dozens of times. "Linda," he began, voice shaking, "I loved you when we were 21, and the world felt full of possibility. I loved you when I was 26, and thought I'd lost you forever. I loved you every year in between, and I love you now, knowing that we have so little time left." He paused, composing himself. "I can't give you back the 37 years we lost. I can't give you the wedding we planned, or the house we were going to buy, or the life we were supposed to build together. But I can give you this promise. For whatever time we have left, whether it's 6 months or 6 weeks or 6 days, you will be loved. Completely. Unconditionally. Forever." Emma watched her mother's face crumple with emotion. When it was Linda's turn, she refused to read from paper. She spoke directly to Richard, her voice weak but clear. "Richard, I have loved you through 37 years of absence. I loved you when I was alone and pregnant. I loved you when I was raising our daughter and wishing you could see her first steps, her first words. I loved you when I was angry at what I thought you'd done. And I love you now, knowing the truth, that you never abandoned us, that you searched for us, that you kept your promises even when you thought I'd broken mine. She reached up with a trembling hand to touch his face. I'm sorry we lost so much time. I'm sorry our daughter grew up without a father. I'm sorry we never got our wedding day in the sunshine. But I'm not sorry for this moment right now, because this moment is real. This moment is ours, and no one can take it away from us. The rings had already been in place for 37 years. Now the chaplain blessed them, blessed the couple who wore them, blessed the love story that had survived decades of separation. By the power vested in me, Chaplain Margaret said with tears in her own eyes, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Richard, you may kiss your bride. Richard leaned down carefully, mindful of the tubes and wires, and kissed Linda with all the gentleness of a man holding something infinitely precious. Emma couldn't stop crying. She was watching her parents' wedding day, 32 years late, in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic instead of flowers, with a bride who could barely sit up. But it was beautiful. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. The weeks that followed were both the hardest and the sweetest of Emma's life. Richard essentially moved into the hospital. He was there when Emma arrived each morning and still there when she left each night. He read to Linda from the books she loved. He held her hand through the bad pain days. He told her stories about the places he'd searched for her, turning 37 years of heartbreak into shared memories. And Emma got to know her father. They would sit together in the hospital cafeteria while Linda slept, drinking terrible coffee and filling in 32 years of gaps. Richard wanted to know everything, every birthday, every school play, every skinned knee and bad dream and triumph. Emma told him about growing up poor but loved, about watching her mother work 3 jobs, about the times she'd asked about her father and seen the pain in Linda's eyes. I wish I could have been there, Richard said over and over. You are here now, Emma would remind him. That's what matters. But they both knew the clock was ticking. 6 weeks after the wedding, Linda took a turn for the worse. The cancer had spread further than anyone had anticipated. The doctors gently suggested hospice care, but Richard refused to move her. She wants to be here, he said. Where we got married, where we became a family. This is where she stays. On a Tuesday morning in late autumn, Emma arrived at the hospital to find her father sitting on Linda's bed, cradling her in his arms. Linda's breathing had become shallow, irregular. The nurses had already explained what this meant. Emma, Linda whispered when she saw her daughter. Come here, baby. Emma climbed onto the other side of the bed, and for several minutes, the 3 of them simply held each other. A family, finally complete, for the last time. I need you both to promise me something, Linda said, each word clearly an effort. Promise me you won't waste any more time. Promise me you'll be father and daughter, really be it. Make up for the years I stole from you. You didn't steal anything, Emma said fiercely. James Ashford stole from us. You survived. You protected me. You loved us both even when you thought one of us had abandoned you. Promise me, Linda insisted, looking at Richard. Promise me you'll take care of her. Not with money. She doesn't need your money. Take care of her heart. Be the father she deserved to have all along. I promise, Richard said, voice breaking. I promise, my love. Linda smiled, peaceful for the first time since Emma could remember. She looked at the rings on her finger, engagement ring and wedding band, finally united after 37 years. Thank you, she whispered, for finding me, for never giving up, for loving me even when I wasn't there to be loved. Thank you, Richard said, for surviving, for keeping our daughter safe, for wearing my ring all these years, for giving me a family, even if I only get to have it for 6 weeks. Linda's eyes closed, her breathing slowed. And surrounded by love, held by her husband and daughter, Linda Marie Ashford, for she'd legally changed her name after the wedding, slipped away peacefully. The grief was enormous, overwhelming. But there was something else too, something that felt almost like relief. Linda had spent 37 years believing herself abandoned, unloved, forgotten. She'd died knowing the truth, that she had been loved every single day, searched for constantly, never forgotten for even a moment. That night, as Emma and Richard sat together in the now empty hospital room, he removed his wedding band and Linda's engagement ring. He threaded them both onto a silver chain. These should be together, he said, handing the chain to Emma. Your mother and I, we're together now. wherever she is. But you're still here. You need to carry the proof of what we had, of what love can survive. Emma looked at the 3 rings on the chain: engagement ring, wedding band, and Richard's ring. 3 pieces of a love story that had survived 37 years of separation. The greatest enemy of love isn't distance, Emma said quietly, understanding finally settling over her. It's lies. Your father's lies stole 37 years from you, but they couldn't kill what you and Mom had. Nothing could. Richard pulled his daughter close. Your mother loved you enough to raise you alone. I loved her enough to search for 37 years. And now I get to love you for whatever time we have left. That's not nothing. That's everything. Emma wore the chain with the 3 rings every day after that. They served as a reminder, not of what had been lost, but of what had survived. Love, when it's real, doesn't die just because circumstances try to kill it. Sometimes the circle takes 37 years to close, but when it finally does, it's unbreakable.